Even though the ocean covers 70% of the planet's surface, more than 80% of our ocean is unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. Dr. Charles William Beebe, a biologist and explorer, was the first person to explore the deep sea with a record-breaking dive of 3,028 feet in the bathysphere, a revolutionary innovation for deep sea exploration. Since then, technology has improved greatly, allowing scientists to travel deeper and explore tinier organisms. We're joined by Dr. Amy Maas, Associate Scientist at the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, and the NASA Exports Project team, who will explain how innovation and technology help ocean scientists study plankton, the tiny guys who matter a lot. Hi, Dr. Maas.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing really good. It's a beautiful day here in Bermuda.
So, why is Bermuda such a strategic location for studying ocean sciences?
This has been a place that people have been studying ocean sciences for a really long time. I mean, going back to William Beebe, but the reason that we're all coming here is that we're relatively close to North America, so it's kind of easy to get things in and out. But we're also like right at the north of a really important ecosystem. So we're the northernmost part of the subtropical and tropical ecosystem. We have the northernmost Atlantic coral, and we have really great access to the deep, deep ocean, right? We're on a volcano, and so it gets incredibly deep, incredibly fast. And for scientists like me who study plankton, which are the teeny tiny animals that swim around in the ocean, we can get to those animals really, really quick with like a 15-minute boat ride. And so then we can bring cool technology straight into the space of the plankton. Then we can catch those plankton and bring them straight back to a lab where I can use a lot of high technology to ask more complicated questions. And so this is just a really unique place. Because of that, scientists have been using this station for a really long time. I mean, we've been at BIOS since 1903.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. So it's not just the fact that it's a strategic location geographically. And how has some of this technology changed since William Beebe's first descent just off of the island near Bermuda?
It's been huge. So that was groundbreaking and really started people giving sort of a sense of the life out there. Since then, we have increased our capacity to go deep, to stay there for a while, and to study sort of the more complicated things. I mean, Beebe could really only look at the large stuff out of his bathysphere, like what was right there. Nowadays, we have techniques where we can either film teeny tiny organisms going through the water column, or we can take water back and we can measure, down to a molecule level. We're doing stuff with viruses, with bacteria. Our sensors for the chemistry and the physics have also really improved. Now we have instruments that we can throw into the ocean and leave out there to keep sensing for us. So we have a suite of what are called gliders, which are basically super cool robots that just swim into the ocean and sample for us all the time. So instead of having to be on a boat, you can send that instrumentation out there to look at what's happening. And all of that just keeps evolving. The questions actually haven't changed that much, though. Like, what's out there? What are they doing? And how are they connected to us as human beings? Those parts are still kind of the same. It's just that the techniques and technologies have let us get deeper and deeper and deeper into answering those at a bunch of different levels.
Another thing that you mentioned was the water column. Can you explain what that is?
Sure, yeah. Unlike the land ecosystem where we usually think about, you've got like this crust of earth and then a little bit on top, some trees maybe get pretty high, but that's like all the space that you have. And the difference between places is sort of like north, south, east, west. You go over here, there's a mountain, over there, it's a plain. In the ocean, what you have is a surface layer where all the light is. And that's where all the plant life is. So these are the teeny tiny plants, single cells, most of them, that are taking sunlight and carbon dioxide, entering that into their body mass. So they're doing photosynthesis. They make 50% of the oxygen on Earth. That's kind of a big deal. And they're up at the surface. And then as you go a little bit deeper in the water column, less light gets through, and you get into what we call the twilight zone. And this is where, I know, right? Woo! There's a bunch of organisms that live here, and they are doing two things. They're kind of taking advantage of the stuff that's coming from the surface water, but they're also hiding from predators. Because, right, like in the ocean, you can't like get behind a tree or crawl under a rock. So these guys, some of them like move down in the water on a daily basis. So when the sunlight's on during the day, they move down to depth where it's dark. And then when it gets dark, they move up. And so they do this migration up and down. So I'm really interested in those guys. And there's still quite a lot of life in this twilight zone. And then you get into the dark zone, which is the abyssal, if you want the real world. And there's all sorts of like, really, this is where you like would go for critters that you would use as inspiration for like a deep sea evil film, right? Like weird octopuses and gelatinous, and they all have huge mouths because they never see food, right? So their tactic is to just like wait for the manna that's coming from heaven or hope that they run into something else. Big mouths. They're also creating light. There's a lot of bioluminescence down there. So this is like further down in the water column. Then you get like super deep close to the bottom. We call that the hadal zone. And they're just really weird because there's tons of pressure and super dark.
And so one of the things that you study deeply is the tiniest organisms. And you said that photosynthesis provides 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. And these are made by the tiniest of organisms, which are called plankton.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about these guys and why they're so important beyond just that?
Because like plankton's a big catch-all phrase for anything that can't swim against a current. So it actually encompasses every mode of life. You can have virus plankton, bacteria plankton, animal plankton, plant plankton, and a lot of what we call the photosynthetic ones, the phytoplankton. There are a bunch of different kinds of life, but they all are photosynthetic. Most of them are either unicellular critters kind of like us, or cyanobacteria. There's also some, floating sargassum, which isn't a true plant. And so all of these guys are floating around. Remember, they're just on this teeny tiny layer right at the surface. And an important piece for us to know, and this is something that's important to me, not only do I want to understand what these organisms are doing, but I want to understand how what humans are doing affects them. So these guys are influenced by climate change, right? So as we produce CO2, which is causing global warming. So it's this heat trapping blanket that's keeping warmth inside the planet. That extra CO2, the ocean plants are taking up some of that extra CO2 that we produced. So they take up about 30% of the extra CO2 that we're creating. And they're turning it into cells, into life, into biomass. And other critters eat them, and some of it falls out. Some of it gets recycled. But the process that I'm kind of interested in is like how much of that CO2 is getting pulled away from the surface, because when it's pulled away from the surface, it's not coming back out, which means the oceans are actually kind of acting like a sponge, taking away some of the extra CO2 that would be causing global climate change, global warming, and it's holding on to that for us. So it's sort of like scrubbing that clean. We don't know how long that's going to go on. We are trying to understand these organisms and these processes to make sure that that ecosystem function that is being provided to us for free by the ocean, thank you ocean, keeps happening.
So, but those are just the phytoplankton. There are other plankton that live in different parts of the ocean.
Yes.
And also a lot of these plankton at times die and they become food for other fish. So they kind of trickle down and fall into these twilight zones and these abysmal zones, and they feed other scavenger type at times organisms, right?
Yeah. And actually, those are the ones I study. I don't study the phytoplankton. I study the animal plankton. We call them zooplankton. And they're super cute. And they're every different kind of life that you can imagine, from like snail to jellyfish to like little baby fish to tons of little shrimpy things. Right. So they eat all of the phytoplankton, and then they have some very important things that they do. They poop. This is critical because that's what sinks out a lot of times. Right. And so that's the food for further down in the food web. Like it concentrates it, moves it down. We gently call that particulate organic carbon when we're like publishing. Right. That's the nice way of saying it. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I'm allowed to say the other stuff. And they also do this thing called a migration. Because they're hiding from predators, they move down. And so what they're doing is they're actually bringing that carbon from the plants down deeper into the water, feeding that twilight zone and moving that carbon dioxide away from exchange with the atmosphere. And that's my major focus, is understanding how these organisms work, how many of them are doing it, why they go as deep as they do, and what's going to happen with climate change. We've only recently started using like modern molecular techniques and new imaging systems. But then once you get all this information, it's a lot of data to go through. So we're using all sorts of new stuff like machine learning algorithms to try to sort through bunches of images all at once, or new technology so that we can actually watch the animals in situ, in the same space, the same way that BB was doing inside his bathysphere, but like zoom up on a very individual zooplankton who's like, grain of sand size, and just watch what it's doing. What, how does it interact with its environment? How is it connecting with other animals nearby? Because when you pull it up in a net, which is kind of still the de facto way of doing it, they're like that, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not very happy with you. And so we're using new tools, new techniques, and we're trying to like understand these organisms in their true environment. And that's just taking a lot of new technology and a lot of new creative approaches.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about the preparation for the exploration, having to go out, putting the crew together, having the proper gear. My little cousin actually is doing all these exercises with asking questions. And one of the ones he asked me recently was, would you rather explore the ocean or space? And what you're describing really actually sounds like the preparation that is needed to go to space. And atmospheric pressure is completely different, of course, but it's still uninhabitable and unlivable for the human body. So the same type of innovation is really necessary for that. Are you going on any expeditions right now, or have you been recently that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting that you mentioned the space part. So I'm actually working with NASA. I don't get to go on any rocket ships, but I am, some of the techniques that they use and some of the techniques that we use are really coming together. We're asking similar questions, and we have questions about inhabitable worlds, many of which are probably going to be ocean worlds, right? They're asking oceanographers, well, how do you study Earth's ocean? How do you send instruments into Earth's ocean if we want to go to places like Europa? But the work that I'm actually doing with NASA right now actually involves studying Earth. And one of the things that NASA does, as everyone probably knows, is there's a lot of satellites up there, and a lot of the NASA satellites are actually looking down at our planet because our planet's the one that we can study most easily. And we're doing a project, it's called Exports Project. And the Exports Project is the biggest project in oceanography in the United States in decades. And it's a whole bunch of scientists who are coming together using every possible new technology to, again, ask these questions. What happens to these phytoplankton? How do they move that carbon from the surface to depth? And can we measure that from space? Can we use satellites to give us sort of a broad picture? Can we use the color of the ocean to tell us what's happening, how much carbon is being moved through, and how that changes with climate? And that is, it's a really cool project, because basically any kind of technology that oceanographers can put in the water, we're putting it in the water. Robots, wire flyers, particle traps, which are like little buckets that collect things falling from the surface, instruments left and right, and a whole bunch of the scientists who are really excited to be working together, thinking about this one same question and applying all the new technologies. I think this kind of work really does help move things forward, and provides a diversity of perspectives and technologies to answer these questions. And it's also just a group of people who are interested in trying to have an impact, trying to make a sustainable world. Exports has been really powerful for me because it's let me meet a lot of people and develop new bonds with a lot of people, and learn where my voice is useful and how to help, and where I also just need to listen.
And you've mentioned also the importance of continuing to study science. So what would be your message to young people or to those who are interested in actually studying ocean sciences? How can they get into this profession? Where do they even start?
Well, really where they start is with passion, with determination, and with curiosity. I had no idea that you could be an ocean scientist. Again, grew up in Ohio. Who has a job as an ocean scientist? And then it's about finding the questions that are important to you, finding good mentors, reaching out to people, and staying committed. It's the face of ocean science is changing. And it's not where we all want it to be yet, but we're pushing for that. And so I think what's important is to find out if this is something that you're passionate about, to ask questions, to look things up online. You have access to a lot of information. And so I know that we can connect you to NASA, we can connect you to BIOS, you can look things up, but then just find people and talk to them about it and think about just, is science a possibility for you? I never thought it was a possibility for me. Here I am.
Thank you so much for bringing that back to kind of our original message, which is a lot of it starts with the story to get the young person involved so that they follow the path towards an ocean science career, or the story that gets somebody to change their habits, or the story that gets the politician to make the correct laws so that they actually protect these marine spaces, and fund ocean science projects so that you can continue to do your research.
Yeah. And even if you don't want to be a marine scientist, that's totally cool and normal. But do recognize that the ocean is important to you and to the rest of humanity, and that those really weird creatures, they deserve to be alive too.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Maas, and thank you to the whole team at BIOS who has really helped to make this interview possible. And we are so excited to continue to hear about your research and how you're saving these little zooplankton. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure, and I'm very excited to be participating in World Oceans Week.